let's talk about power. What is power in 1984, and who has power? That's the real question. At the end of the book, O'Brien gives a long discourse on power. He says on page 263 that power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Those are haunting words, chilling words. In some ways, they are words straight out of the depths of hell. Because what is he talking about with power? Not the power to do good, because then good is the end, right? Power is the means to the end of good. He's saying no. Power itself is the end. Torture is itself the end. Making everything under my control is the end, the goal, the purpose of all of this. And in some ways, that should resonate really strongly with the Christian tradition for those of us who are immersed in it. Because we know that that's one of the first lies that humans buy into, is that they can have power. Not as a means to something else, but knowledge, to know what is good and evil, knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's funny that they never say, like the passage in Genesis doesn't go, so that you can have knowledge of what is good and evil so that you can choose the good. No. It's just the knowledge of good and evil. Because once you eat it, you will be like gods and you will know good from evil. Doesn't distinguish what you might do with that knowledge. And so knowledge, power to be like God is itself the end. And O'Brien tells us that is actually the goal. Is that what power is about? And if so, then how is power manifest in the world of 1984? Well, I think it's manifest through watching. Not just watching, but through surveillance. When we think about this, if surveillance is backed up with the ability then to cause harm, right? Because we know that when the people are surveilled and if they're seen doing something that is perceived as contrary to the state, they will be taken to the Ministry of Love, a very inappropriately named ministry, where they will be tortured. And so being surveilled, it's not just the watching, but it's the power to harm that is coupled with that watching. But watching then itself becomes a means by which people express their power. So when we think about this, we think of the way that the telescreen watches Winston. And we see it at the very beginning, right? When he's doing the calisthenics and the woman on the screen calls him out for not reaching down to his toes far enough. We see it in the fear of microphones being everywhere. We see it in Winston moving off to the one little corner of his house where he can write unseen. We see the sense of being watched as a powerful thing when O'Brien flips off his telescreen. And Julia and Winston are amazed that party members in the inner party can actually escape surveillance. That becomes the mark of power then, right? To be the one unsurveilled, or even better, to be the one doing the surveilling. This gets acted out in a really poignant way with the Parson family. Those little kids, those little nippers, as Mr. Parson calls them, who are surveilling their parents, and to end up reporting their father to the Ministry of Love as part of their exercise of power over their father and their exercise of loyalty to the state. And we start to see at this point that there's some things that are really interconnected, right? Power manifests through watching, power that's backed up by the ability to harm, and power exercised for and against certain loyalties. All of these start to become interwoven in 1984. Who's watching you? We talked in the video about freedom, about the idea of God watching us. And what does that mean for the Christian tradition, the idea that God is always watching us? Do we have freedom? What is freedom? When power and watching and surveillance are backed up by not just the ability, but the intent to harm, it's an incredibly scary thing. And in fact, That's what almost gives Winston's gaze of Julia during some of their encounters such a chilling effect. If you notice, there are moments when he's gazing at her, like on page 125 to 126, where you get the sense that maybe he's exercising a sort of power over her that can also have an intent to harm. An intent for good, but also an intent to harm. Whose gaze is it? What about God's gaze? What about when surveillance? What about being watched? What if that's backed up not by the intent to harm, but the intent to love? I have 2 kids and I watch them all the time, especially when they were little, right? Not as an act of power over them, although I did have power over them, but out of love, so that they wouldn't be harmed. And of course, we can instantly see where all of that becomes so problematic, right? Because what if the person with the power thinks they're doing something out of love, as Big Brother claims, but really it's out of an intent to harm? Really, it's out of that desire for power. Really, it's torture for the sake of torture. Well, then it's just self-deception. I think the answer to power and the answer to freedom in this novel that are so frightening have to be grounded in a fundamentally different character. So long as the characters in power are seeking their own ends, it's always going to end up badly. So how does the Christian tradition unwind or untangle this mess of power and watching and freedom? It says that the thing, the force, the ground of being at the center of the universe is fundamentally for you. It says that the God who spoke everything into existence is fundamentally on your side and loves you. And not in a way that's about his own end, but in a way that is about your good, your very being. Your mere existence is an end in itself for God, out of love. And then that changes the whole equation. And we see that that's actually the counter to Big Brother. That's the counter to surveillance. That's the counter to this power that sees power itself as an end. Love. A God who is fundamentally on your side. A God whose goodness and love is an unlimited resource. Always seeking the other. Always seeking your good. And that's pretty amazing.